Nobody wants to own this business. Nobody makes a course about it. No guru films a testimonial in front of one. It's the business people lower their voice to talk about and cross the street to avoid thinking about. And that is exactly why it's one of the most quietly profitable, most defended businesses in America. 3 videos ago, we found a pattern. The louder a business is promoted, the worse its books tend to be. The laundromat, sold everywhere, earned a warning. The vending machine, the internet's favorite empire, earned a money pit. And the storage facility, boring, unglamorous, promoted by no one, earned the cleanest stamp we'd given. Today, we test that pattern against its ultimate case. A business with the one thing every other business dreams of and never gets: perfectly guaranteed, permanently recurring, completely recession-proof demand. A customer base that grows every single year on a schedule written into human biology itself. And an industry that almost nobody new is allowed to enter. Today we open the books on the funeral home. What it costs, how it really makes money, the quiet contracts that lock in revenue years before it's earned, and the one modern shift that is genuinely threatening the whole model. And at the end, like always, this business gets the stamp: clever, risky, or money pit. So, is a funeral home a clever investment? Let's open the books. Respectfully, start with the thing this business has that almost none of the others did: a real moat. Several, actually. The first is demand that never, ever stops. Every other business we've judged had to fight for customers. The car wash needed the right corner. The laundromat needed the neighborhood to stay poor enough to keep renting. The vending machine needed foot traffic. The funeral home needs none of it. Roughly 3 million Americans pass away every year, and that number is rising as the baby boomers age. Death does not care about interest rates, recessions, or the stock market. It is the only truly non-cyclical demand in all of business. The second moat is licensing. You cannot simply decide to open a funeral home. In most states, you need a licensed funeral director, which means a degree in mortuary science, a year or more of apprenticeship, board exams, and embalming certification. That is a wall most industries would kill for. The vending machine had no barrier at all, which is why beginners flooded in and margins collapsed. The funeral home has one of the highest barriers to entry of any small business in America. Scarcity is protection. And the third moat is the strangest and strongest of all. Grief does not shop on price. When a family loses someone, they are not opening 5 browser tabs to compare quotes. They are exhausted, they are emotional, and they go to the name they know and trust, usually the funeral home that buried their parents and their grandparents. That trust, built over decades, often carrying a single family's name for a century, is a brand moat that no amount of marketing money can buy quickly. In this business, reputation isn't a nice-to-have. It's the entire asset. Guaranteed demand, a licensing wall, unshoppable trust, 3 moats most businesses would trade everything for. And this one has all 3 at once. So what does it cost to get behind that moat? Building a funeral home from scratch is rare and difficult. Not just the specialized facility, the preparation rooms, the chapel, the parking, but the fact that you'd be a brand new name in a business where the name is everything. Almost nobody does it, which points to the only real way in, and it's the same pattern this series keeps finding. You buy an existing one. And here the numbers get interesting because the industry is standing on the edge of a massive handover. Surveys have found that around a third of funeral home owners plan to retire within 5 years, but nearly 3/4 of them have no one to pass the business on to. The kids didn't want it. There's no heir behind the counter, which means a wave of established, trusted, century-old funeral homes are coming up for sale from owners who need to sell. A small-town funeral home might change hands somewhere in the mid-6 figures to a few million, depending heavily on the real estate and the call volume, the number of funerals it handles a year. And that price often buys something precious. Not just a building, but a name the whole town already trusts and a book of families who will come back. You are buying decades of reputation you could never build from zero, which is why, when a big company buys a funeral home, they do something telling. They keep the family's name on the door, the founder retires, the sign never changes, and most of the town never knows it sold. Hold on to that detail. It tells you exactly where the value in this business really lives. Now, follow the money through a single funeral. A traditional full-service burial in America runs somewhere around $7,000 to $8,000. And inside that number is the profit engine of the entire industry, the casket. A casket that costs the funeral home a few hundred to a couple $1,000s wholesale is often sold for two, three, sometimes four times that, presented in a showroom at the exact moment a family least wants to look cheap about saying goodbye. Add the embalming, the preparation, the viewing, the use of the chapel, the hearse, the coordination, the paperwork with the state, each a line item, each with margin. Net it out, and a well-run traditional funeral produces real profit, hundreds to over $1,000 per service, on a 10 to 15% net margin. Not the fattest margin we've seen. But remember what's underneath it. Demand that cannot be competed away at a price the customer will not haggle. A typical funeral home handles 10 to 20 services a month. Do that math, and a single trusted small-town home quietly produces 6 or 7 figures of revenue a year, from a building most people never notice, run by a handful of people, in a business with no online competitor, no seasonality, and no bad Yelp review that ever changed a grieving family's mind. But there's a second revenue stream here that's even more interesting than the funerals themselves. And it's the closest thing in this whole series to a money printing machine. It's called pre-need. And once you understand it, you understand why investors love this industry. A pre-need contract is a funeral bought in advance. A person in their 60s or 70s, wanting to spare their family the cost and the decisions, walks into the funeral home and pays for their own funeral today, to be delivered years, sometimes decades, in the future. The money is collected now. The service is rendered later, sometimes much later. Think about what that does to the business. Remember the car wash membership where recurring revenue turned a weather-dependent shop into a predictable machine? Remember the storage rent escalator where customers stayed for years? Pre-need is that idea taken to its logical extreme. The funeral home collects cash for services it will not perform until the customer dies, locking in that family at today's prices, guaranteeing future revenue on a contract that essentially cannot be canceled by circumstance. It is the most certain future revenue in all of business because the delivery date, however far off, is not in question. A funeral home with a large book of pre-need contracts isn't just a business. It's a portfolio of guaranteed future income sitting on top of a guaranteed demand curve. That is precisely the kind of predictable, recurring, recession-proof cash flow that makes Wall Street's eyes light up, which is exactly what happened. But before we stamp this thing, we have to be honest about the one force genuinely threatening it. Because this is not a business without risk. It's a business with a single, slow, enormous risk: cremation. For most of the last century, the traditional burial, casket, embalming, plot, headstone, was the default, and it was the profit engine. But America has been quietly changing its mind. Cremation has gone from a small minority of deaths to the majority, and it is still climbing. More and more families are choosing it, for cost, for simplicity, for environmental reasons, for changing beliefs about death itself. And here is the problem for the funeral home. A traditional burial might bring $7,000 or $8,000. A full-service cremation, less. But a direct cremation, no viewing, no casket, no ceremony, just the essentials, can be $1,000 or $2,000, and it can be booked online from a discount provider that never meets the family in person. The casket markup, the embalming, the chapel, the entire high-margin ladder simply vanishes. So the guaranteed demand is still there. Death isn't going anywhere. But the revenue per death is under real structural pressure, and low-cost cremation-only competitors are attacking the industry the way discounters attack every business eventually. The funeral home's demand is bulletproof. Its price per customer is not. Any honest verdict on this business has to weigh the perfect demand against the shrinking check. And the smartest operators are the ones already adapting, offering premium cremation experiences, memorial services, and keeping the margin by keeping the meaning. Which brings us to Wall Street. Because everything we've described, the guaranteed demand, the pre-need cash, the trusted local names, the wave of retiring owners with no heirs, adds up to exactly the kind of business that big money loves to roll up. And it has. The largest death care companies in North America have spent decades quietly buying up thousands of independent funeral homes and cemeteries. The biggest single operator runs well over 1,000 locations. Private equity has moved in hard for all the reasons this video has laid out: predictable income, aging demographics, fragmented mom and pop ownership, and sellers who need an exit. But watch the move they make, because it's the whole lesson of this business in one gesture. When they buy your town's 100-year-old funeral home, they keep the name. The sign stays. The family that founded it may be long gone, but the trust that name carries is the actual asset. And they know it. They're not buying buildings. They're buying reputations. The one thing in this industry that can't be built fast, discounted, or disrupted overnight. And notice the pattern 4 videos deep. In the car wash and the storage facility, the institutions were your exit. They'd buy your stabilized business. Here it's the same, but stronger. Because what they want isn't your equipment or your dirt. It's your good name in a town that trusts it. That is the rarest, most durable asset this entire series has found. Let's run honest numbers on the realistic play. Buying an established funeral home from a retiring owner. Say you acquire a trusted small town home for $1.5 million, building included, handling about 150 services a year. At an average revenue of, say, $6,000 a service, blending traditional and cremation, that's around $900,000 in annual revenue. Subtract the costs, staff, which is the biggest line. Licensed directors don't come cheap. The facility, the vehicles, the caskets and supplies, insurance, and the endless licensing and compliance. Funeral homes run tighter margins than you'd guess. Call it 10 to 15% net. So on $900,000 of revenue, maybe $100,000 to $135,000 in profit, before debt. That alone is a solid small business. But layer on the 2 things that make it special. First, the pre-need book. Every contract you sign is future revenue locked in today, growing the value of the business without a single new customer walking through the door. And second, the real estate and the name, which appreciate and which an institutional buyer will one day pay a premium to acquire, your exit is built in. The risk in the model isn't demand, it's the mix. If your market shifts hard toward direct cremation faster than you adapt, that $6,000 average shrinks, and a comfortable business gets tight. This is not a business you buy and ignore. It's one you buy, honor, and modernize carefully. So, is a funeral home a clever investment? Time for the stamp. Weigh it honestly. On one side, the most bulletproof demand in all of business, a licensing wall that keeps competitors out, a trust-based brand moat that takes a century to build, pre-need contracts that lock in future cash, and a permanent institutional buyer waiting at your exit. On the other side, tight operating margins, the real and rising threat of low-cost cremation squeezing the revenue per death, and a business that demands genuine care, licensing, and emotional labor most people are not built for. Put it together, and the verdict is clear. For the right operator, licensed or partnered with someone who is buying an established name, respecting what the business actually is, and adapting to the cremation shift instead of ignoring it, this is one of the most durable, defended, recession-proof businesses in America. It stamps clever. With one honest asterisk, the check per customer is shrinking, so this is a business you must actively modernize, not a monument you can sit on. Final verdict, clever, the quiet fortress. Because it isn't really a funeral business. It's a trust business wearing a real estate business protected by a licensing wall, sitting on the only demand curve that never bends. And look at the scoreboard now. Car wash, clever. Storage, clever. Laundromat, risky. Vending machines, money pit. Funeral home, clever. The pattern held all the way down. The businesses the internet screams about earned the warnings. The businesses nobody wants to talk about, storage, and now this, earned the crown. The less a business is promoted, the more carefully you should look at it. That's not a coincidence anymore. That's the law of this series. Think the stamp is wrong? The comments are yours. If this made you see an ordinary building on your street differently, subscribe. One business every video, books wide open, verdict stamped. And next time, we look at a business where the customers own their homes but not the land beneath them, can almost never afford to leave, and pay you rent every month for the dirt. Is a mobile home park a clever investment?